My name is Dave Kang. I'm from Dragos. I don't know how many of you folks are familiar with Dragos or what we do. Some of you may be customers. Some of you might have heard of us. There have been books alluding to us, all this kind of stuff. Really, what I want to talk to you today is OT specifically. Dragos concentrates and focuses solely on OT. And one of the things that I always look at and hear is IT is different than OT. Yes, that's true, but no one bothers to really explain why. So what I'm going to do here is maybe insult people's intelligence and or just level set for what I want to talk about, which will be coming on the screen sometime. Effectively, they're completely conflicting systems, right? So I just wanted to give you an overview of that. We're going to talk again about the threat landscape as well, from what Dragos sees, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the 5 critical controls, which are sort of a framework to go over and how do you approach OT cybersecurity as a whole. Now, what is Dragos? For those of you who don't know, we are a specifically OT cybersecurity company, right? It's not about technology. It's not about just having a tool in the toolbox. That's just one element of what we do, and that's really fed from our OT threat intel team, which is the largest in the world. That is first party. Everybody on the team writes their own reports. We're not just regurgitating feeds. We have vulnerability analysts. We have reverse malware analysts. We have people who are actually in the Telegram chats that you're talking about. A lot of them are former 3-letter agency, name it. We're based out of Hanover, Maryland, and obviously the proximity to government is important for us there. We also do services, probably most famous for doing incident response, things like the second Ukraine power attack in 2016. Perhaps you've heard of the crisis in the Saudi petrochemical plant, which was the first instance of killware, right? The other element behind Dragos is really collective defense. Our tagline is safeguarding civilization. It sounds corny, but we care as much about this that you have lights and running water that's clean. We care enough about this that we actually give the product away to municipalities under a certain dollar threshold of revenue. So that concludes the timeshare portion of this, right? So how did we actually get here? So if you think about the context of what we hear about mostly, what I've heard about mostly today, with the exception of the Stephen from Siemens, who was addressing it, IT versus OT, right? IT, we're typically talking about data. That's why data is so critical as far as what is important as far as information security. You have things like what you see here, digital IP, customer info. All this stuff is a legitimate concern. But what is OT? OT is really the interaction between computer systems and physical systems. So when he was alluding to safety, for example, it's really maximizing your availability as safely as possible because, yes, people can get hurt in these environments. I've spent my fair share of time in dirty, dusty floors. I've had to throw away clothes after visiting facilities before, just because it does get that grimy and gross, depending on where you are. And no insult to anybody's business, right? So it's really the reality of things. So you have all these systems that are effectively not governed. We talk about OT systems. Generally, everybody thinks about Windows boxes that are out of date. Fine, that's one element of it. We're also talking about automation devices, PLCs, things that are not authenticated, they are not encrypted, there's no audit capability, nothing gets logged, and these are all purpose-built devices that don't run an operating system. You can't apply group policy to them. And really, how did this come about? Well, in the past, everything was isolated. It used to all be proprietary cables, proprietary protocols. Only those things could communicate with one another. So that security by obscurity used to be a real thing. Protected bubbles, islands of automation. Perhaps you've heard that term before, right? So today, with the advent well, not today, 30 years ago, I would say, with the introduction of Ethernet. What ended up happening is we have the same media and the same capability, the same connections, everything's riding on TCP/IP stack, right? So all of this came all at once, and these systems just built by accretion. And as the drive for more data came around, it's about connecting multiple devices. Analogy of your home, 10, 15 years ago, how many devices did you have connected in your own home, right? That accretion now, you probably have like a toaster that's connected to the Wi-Fi or something like that, right? But the same thing is happening on factory floors, right? So that expansive and exponential growth of all the devices that are possibly on the network, well, that's open attack surface. And this is stuff that people have never considered in reality, right? So that's kind of a brief background. The reality is, it was mentioned before, systems that are 10, 15, 20, 40 years old, they're still in use. It's not realistic to think that anybody's going to rip and replace it without good reason. That's how you make your money, right? It's how you're delivering a consistent product, and it's the best way you know how to do it. So when we talk about threat landscape, right, this is kind of weird transition here, but this is the stuff that everybody always wants to hear about. What does the threat landscape look like? What we're seeing now, as far as Dragos' observation, is obviously world events that are going on, political tensions between multiple types of countries and such. Dragos, we don't do attribution, just so you know. I'm not going to blame a country like those Denmark people are messing everything up. No, it's not like that, right? So what we see is a lot of what somebody had mentioned before, a lot of dwell time and looking to exfiltrate data to have things set up to take later action in the event of something were to happen. So take, for example, if we think about critical infrastructure and it being compromised, the water treatment plant that he was talking about before, why would anybody attack that? Usually there is a military-based application for that. There was a Massachusetts similar type of issue, and it had to do with a military base located in the area. So while we are worrying about trying to get water and electricity running to these folks, what's going to happen? What is the response going to look like? And the fact is the military is not going to be able to move, right, and respond to any of these conflicts. So think about it in the context of that. Targeted operations, this is the trend that we're seeing now against critical infrastructure, but those things actually can also be used in nearly every manufacturing environment. And you guys generally aren't subject to regulation. So one of the issues behind that is there's been no impetus, there's been no gun to somebody's head saying, you gotta do something about this, right? Hacktivist is something that used to be something of a side note, like a also mentioned kind of thing. What we're seeing though is a lot more hacktivist behavior, just with the intent to cause disruption, whether it's critical infrastructure or otherwise, right? It could be they don't like what you do. What did your CEO say? You know, it could be something that simple. And really, the phases that we're seeing now are the intelligence gathering and just staging, right? So it is kind of no longer the nation state threat actor, the state-sponsored adversary. It is also the hacktivist groups and the cyber criminals all working in unison. They're sharing tools. This is what's going on right now, right? So it really is a matter of time, and I'm not trying to scare everybody, but the real fact of the matter is, traditionally you've not been a target. What's the impetus for it? Why would I attack whatever? Just because they can, right? Every manufacturing environment that I've ever been in, yes, there's a standard. There's governance associated with maintaining security from an infrastructure standpoint. But the reality is manufacturing facilities tend to operate in their own fiefdom, right? So even though you decree something has to be installed, this is the software we need to use, One of the issues there is somebody is the king of the castle. I heard somebody earlier talking about the plant manager being responsible for that. And there's just another example of it, right? It's the I'll be damned, the corporate is going to tell me what to do kind of mentality, right? Very proud, and these are controls engineers, right, from the start. These are very, very intelligent people who are trying to solve a problem, which is to keep things operating 24/7 as efficiently as possible. So you give them that job to do, they're going to do anything in their power to do it. This is also not to say ransomware is not a problem. The data is a little bit skewed on this, and I will admit it's only recently, relatively recently, past 8 years, that we've really been focusing on ransomware statistics. What we're seeing, though, is an exponential increase just because it is known how ineffective security controls in OT are. So I spoke earlier about legacy systems. Yes, you're going to see Windows 95. You're going to see Windows XP. I've seen Windows NT 4. I've seen things that make any IT person shake in their boots, right? The fact that they have that on their network. The problem is these machines were created by a company to make your product. They do one specific job, and that's all that gets supported. Maybe that company no longer exists. The guy who programmed it in the first place died or retired or whatever. Just because you don't have the wherewithal to replace those systems means you have to maintain these legacy pieces of hardware. The first gut reaction is always, well, we need to get rid of that, replace it with a newer operating system, get this up to patch standards. Well, other news for you about industrial automation software in general, it's not backwards compatible. So if you patch something in Windows, there's a good chance you're going to break the connection to be able to control that PLC. So patching is not the devil or anything like that, but that in conjunction with operating in a 24/7 environment, there's not a lot of window to do any remediation, even if you can do it in the first place, right? So it's often the case that it's just very well known that industrial systems have legacy equipment in it, right? And it's not realistic for it to all be ripped and replaced. So that's why the ransomware threat persists regardless, okay? So some stats there. Operational disruption is your immediate financial loss, right? It could also lead to safety. Think about waste product. Think about cleaning if it's applicable to you. The staff having to take time out to do that. Perhaps you're a processor or batch manufacturer. You have to throw out all of that because it's not up to standard, right? So there's operational disruption. Attack amplification via the supply chain. So I think a good example would be something like Clorox, right? Everybody heard about Clorox. Even though they were compromised and they could still create their product, they had no way of packaging it. So if you can't get that to the consumer, it's the same thing as not being able to produce a product. If you can't get paid for it, if you can't ship it out, so this applies to not just the industrial system. As we see, they're all further and further integrated. Whether you have an MES, ERP regulating all of that, there is some crossover there, right? And all of these systems are so intertwined. And when Dr. Barb had mentioned that, how do you solve for this to run for 100 days even? This is something that you have to consider, right? Again, legacy OT systems, I can't stress this enough because it is always, every single thing I hear is, we got to patch. Tell me what the vulnerabilities are so we can patch it. But the understanding is that if you eliminate the vulnerability, there is no risk. But if you eliminate the vulnerability, oftentimes you're going to stop production, and who knows if it's ever going to happen. That goes hand in hand with things like restores, backups. How do you find the PLC program that actually did that? Do you have backups? It's usually a case where it's seriously like Joe has a USB stick in his drawer. Nobody's had to re-download that program to the PLC in 20 years. So if that PLC died, what would you do? And that's part of the problem, right? I previously worked for Rockwell Automation, right? So their equipment is so bulletproof, right, that it's still working. No, I'm not doing that. But really, it's about understanding the needs, right, in order to maintain that operating efficiency. And then human safety implications in a lot of systems there. So I mentioned that Dragos does incident response, and in 2024, all of these statistics, by the way, are in the Dragos Year in Review 2025, which is a free resource to download that gives you an overview of everything OT specific, right? So what we have seen in compromised instances, companies with effective controls. So something as simple as offline backups, network segmentation, all of these rudimentary basic things are becoming more prevalent. I'm hearing a lot of people paying more attention to it, but it's not actually being done. There's a lot to take on. It's an ongoing process, and you're never going to be done. So a lot of people are daunted by that and rely on well, nothing's happened to us for 15 years, so what's the problem now? One of the things that I also think about in incident response cases, the time to actually respond and investigate what's going on is significantly lengthened just because there's no collection management framework, right? So what are the data points? Do you know where your Windows logs are? That's a very, very basic item. But more importantly, these OT systems, if they do get affected, there's no log at all, right? So how do you have the ability to piece back together what happened when you have no record of what happened, right? So lack of controls, which is time and time again, in fact, it's most cases, the incident response, I mean, we're talking about 10 days, 2 weeks before you can even start investigation, just because no one knows where the logs are. It's the first thing that Dragos is going to ask you if you call us to respond to something. Where are your logs? What kind of records do you have? And that alone is one of the biggest pain points as far as getting an investigation started. Risk from the front lines, this is what we've seen, essentially. Inadequate network segmentation, how do you contain it? That came up before. The answer is segmentation, but how do you do that? Well, it's going to depend. It's going to really depend on your environment, what your needs are. I've had people say, I want to segment everything. We're going to have only PLCs on one network. There's a lot of technical reasons why you should never do that, but it's also don't leave it as a flat network, which is what I see time and time and time again. If you think about the context, I mentioned these proprietary machines running on legacy technology. These are all built by the lowest bidder, right? So you're looking at an unmanaged switch sitting inside this cabinet that's controlling 10, 12, 20 plus devices. And there's no way to monitor it, right? So it presents a huge challenge. Most of the people on the IT side that I talk to are only aware of the Windows boxes because that's what some kind of active tooling might be able to discover, right? And yeah, you not only have the PLCs, you have VFDs, you have I/O, you have all these automation devices, and then you bring into things like a ControlLogix backplane on the chassis with multiple Ethernet IP cards. How do you see those hundreds of assets that you had no idea were there, right? Shared authentication, this is one that, yes, I am aware that it is an absolute nightmare to even attempt to do, to separate domains and have no overlap with that. But really, if one set of credentials is compromised and then used in the OT and IT environment, you're pretty much giving away access there. Lack of visibility, right? Asset visibility to me is very funny because yes, you want to know what's there, but is that really solving a security risk? Well, if you can't do anything about the vulnerability associated with it outside of doing segmentation around it because it's legacy, what do you do, right? It's really a list of things you kind of can't do anything about. I can't replace this equipment. I can't patch it for vulnerability. So what's really out there? Asset visibility, to me, goes part and parcel to actual communications. What's the device communicating with? Should it be? How is it doing it? And what is it doing? And these are the elements that I'm talking about with monitoring and visibility. We don't really care about the asset inventory necessarily. It is important, you do need to know that, but it's really the communications that are more important. And I had mentioned not only unmanaged switches, but unmanaged transient devices. You probably don't know this, but your consultant or your distributor, your electrical distributor, they're going to your sites, they're plugging in. They're plugging in and somebody's giving them an IP address that, yeah, it's on the same subnet. You better hope it's not in use, right? And I've seen things go out and go very sideways just from that. And a lot of that has to do with just no visibility. You have no control or regulation over what IPs are being consumed. And yeah, you might say, like, I have an IPAM, I have all these controls in place. When it's an unmanaged switch in the first place, you're not really gonna know, right? So this is the reality of what we have to deal with. And that's why when I talk about legacy systems, I tend to harp on that so much. This is not stuff that's going to go away, short of a massive, massive investment, right? It's just not economically feasible in most cases. So let's think about third-party risks. USB drives, you all hear about malware spreading through a flash drive that gets plugged in somewhere, whether it's your vendor, subcontractor, someone internally. Just, is it clean or not? Is there a VM that has malware on it? Simply connecting is going to cause some problems. Unauthorized remote access methods. This is one of my favorites because everybody says to me, oh, we use Zscaler, we use Cisco, we use whatever. So did you know about the device that's actually on the machine? Also, it's connected via cellular, and you're giving somebody access externally with credentials that you have no idea or control over, and they have direct access to a machine. Chances are that machine can reach something else, right? And these are the sort of things we do when we do things like OT compromise assessments. We're looking specifically for indications of that. Are there on-machine VPN routers in place? If so, are they authorized? Who is actually doing it? It's something that you really have to monitor. Insecure vendor portals, we see this all the time. Not to harp on, or I don't want to insult Europeans or anything like that, but I have often noticed that the documentation for a lot of European manufacturers don't include any stipulations for security. Their knowledge base, I've seen them not have HTTPS on it at all, for example, and they want you to download software from these types of sites. So it's really another thing to consider. What are you actually connecting to? Is it legitimate? There's a company, HMS, that relatively recently purchased Ewan. Anyone familiar? Yeah, see, I've seen a thumbs down, right? So nobody wants those in the environment. Just as an example of vendor compromise, there is an application that's the VPN client for these devices. They actually got into the website and put a malicious copy of what looked like the VPN application on their website. People were downloading that and using that to connect, but it had a wide open backdoor, right? So this is the sort of thing that's going on. And again, it's done out of necessity. It's done out of lack of resources. It's done out of keeping things running. There is a facility, I'm from Philly, I know, boo, but there's a company called Eastern Controls, and they run what is called the process training unit there. I believe there's one here in Cleveland as well, but it's sort of like a test bed for all the software and equipment that's all out there. When I think about the control side of things, their last priority is doing security for it, because it is hard enough to keep that running. And all this facility does, I'm not kidding, it heats up water in a tank and moves it to another tank. Yet it takes 2 guys to maintain this full time, specifically dedicated to making sure it works, right? Do you think that guy is gonna care about security? No. Do you think he wants to be restricted by a privilege on there. No, I'm going to make it admin. Everything's local admin, make life easier, right? This is the mentality, and it's really unawareness on both sides. What are the objectives? What are you doing? So all this gloom and doom, 5 Critical Controls is a document written by SANS. Okay, so Tim Conway, who is a fellow at SANS, and our CEO at Dragos, Rob Lee, co-wrote this document for the SANS.org Institute, SANS Institute, that is. 5 Critical Controls, it is a white paper. I'm going to give you a hyper-shortened version of this, all in one slide here. So when we think about what can you actually do, every framework that's out there is talking about this, right? It's not about checking the boxes. It's about, are you providing actual protection for your environment? And right here, this is all those frameworks distilled into 5 different categories. 1, incident response plan, specifically for your OT ICS environment. If you don't have that, you're not gonna know how to respond, right? We do incident response plan tests. We do the tabletop exercises, whether it's from an operator level, from an executive level, knowing who to call, having that data ready to go. And I love to talk about tabletops earlier because I have never seen grown people cry as much as watching tabletops, right? They think their job's on the line, and we need to get out of that mentality. But number 2, defensible architecture. When I talk about those unmanaged devices, there are a ton of them out there. I ask nearly anybody in a leadership position, how many unmanaged switches do you think we have? Nope, none. We got Cisco 9000s in every closet, but downstream of that, what do you have? Well, we never looked, right? That brings up another point of ownership. Does IT own it? Does OT own it? Who is responsible for the maintenance? Who is responsible for collaborating, right? And that's what we see time and time again. Traditionally, these organizations have absolutely butted heads. What I'm seeing now is a little bit more of a understanding and willingness to go forward, probably because they're receiving pressure from leadership. But it's refreshing to see. And it's like, I've been telling you to do this for 10 years, but go ahead and not listen more. Defensible architecture, though, that's really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, right? So you think about the infrastructure that exists. I'm talking about unmanaged switches. Maybe you have to rip and replace those switches just to have some monitoring capability, some visibility associated with that. How do you maximize what you see? It is absolutely ridiculous to think you'll get 100% coverage of every single piece of equipment, right? Short of going back and looking at the documents that show you bought whatever. You don't know if they're in service. You don't know if they're spares. You don't really know. And it's those unknowns that become easier if you have an architecture that can be defended, right? As opposed to the flat network, which I see every single day. /16 subnet, seen that too. It's wild what folks are doing in their environments, right? And there's no oversight to it. And the excuse is, well, I just keep it running. It really needs to be a mutual communication and respect and knowledge of what one side's priorities are versus the other. Where can you get together? There was I referred to it as, I got interrogated by these folks here. There were some pre-canned questions. Well, it was one about how do you best do IT and OT together under the framework of IT. How do you do it easily? Well, the answer is you don't really do it easily. It is, for all intents and purposes, despite speaking the same language of Ethernet, they're entirely separate estates, and they need to be treated differently, and there needs to be understanding behind that. Yes, policy is policy. I don't care if it's an exception. I don't care if it's a whole new policy just for OT. That has to work hand in hand, just because, as I've told you, you fundamentally can't do some of the normal controls in IT. So everybody needs to get on the same page with that ownership aspect as well. And I bring that up with defensible architecture just because network design, who's planning this? What is it planned for? What's the scale? How are you dividing your network up? How are you making it so you can contain things? How are you, number three, achieving network visibility? And that's another challenge that we face. Obviously, we have a network visibility tool that does look for threats, the Dragos platform and such. I don't care who you use. It doesn't matter. It's just getting any semblance of visibility in your environment is absolutely key. And again, I'm not just talking about asset identification. I'm talking about what are the things that are communicating and should they be? You know, why is this PLC traversing 4 zones over? Does it actually need to communicate with that? Typically, no. And this is where you need the operations folks, the control side of the house, to help understand exactly what's necessary in order to better design and architect that defensible architecture. So it goes hand in hand. Segmentation validation. You think these are air-gapped, but you have a tool in place that's showing you the communication, telling you when it was, what it was. What do you do about that? Well, obviously your segmentation is flawed and you're not air-gapped, right? So visibility is absolutely key. Secure remote access, we don't offer any kind of solution for that, but what we do is monitoring for that. And this is what I was talking about, centralizing your remote access into as few different manners as possible, right? So what you don't want to see is this facility using EWANS, this one using ProSoft, this one using Secamia, this one's using a Hirschman, this one's using whatever. There needs to be a policy instated on that, and above all, it needs to be monitored, right? I just can't even believe that some of these pieces of equipment rely on credentials that you have no control over, right? Your vendor, the guy who built the machine, doesn't want to travel. He's working in a 5-man shop. They don't have the resources to do anything. Remote access is very interesting because of that, right? Think of the cost savings and the immediate help. You don't have to send a guy on site, et cetera, et cetera. How do you control that? How do you regulate that? Just don't forget, you're the customer to them, right? You can say no, and you can push back. And one of the things that I particularly liked was a guy who said, this is the dollar amount that a compromise would actually, what could be compromised, this is how much it's going to cost if this machine was compromised, right? And the idea is, that dollar figure, are you prepared to underwrite for that? They're going to get on a plane and see you next time your equipment breaks, right? So the last of the critical controls, risk-based vulnerability management. Again, I'm not saying throw patches out the window, but think about it in terms of genuine risk. I'll give you an example. You have 2 PLCs. One is in a cabinet, and it is your workhorse, it is your crown jewel asset. It is controlling water flow to every system in the place. You have the exact same PLC on Fred's desk that he uses to test on. Are you going to treat those the same? What's the actual risk? Well, one is significant, one is irrelevant, right? How do you determine that? It's really about where does it make sense to actually go after these vulnerabilities? And it's not just me who'll say this. Rob Lee, the CEO, will say, if you spend more than X number of hours on vulnerability management in an OT environment, you're doing it wrong. Because a lot of this is beyond what a patch can do. It's all about mitigation, right? And that's something that those of you who are familiar with Dragos platform, we do offer guidance as far as what can be done for that. How am I doing on time?
You have 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, well, that's good because I'm just done here. Are there any questions? Was this all stuff that everybody knows already? Am I just preaching to the choir here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, the question is, you mentioned about legacy equipment and everything else that goes in the OT network, right? But a lot of the things you cover here is focused on the network itself. How do you deal when the vulnerability is constrained to the legacy equipment?
So it's
you cannot even see any traffic or malicious traffic on the network and you still can shut down a facility if you go directly to the equipment by plugging a service tool or whatever. There are several different ways of bringing that down. Even if you leave some latent malicious code on that equipment, it can shut down on its own or cause harm. So everything, I completely agree with everything you said there, but that's all focused mostly on the network. How do you handle the vulnerabilities that are not based on network traffic?
It really is about the network though, right? If you have those segments constricted to a piece of Rockwell hardware, 44818 and UDP 2222, that segmentation alone will restrict just the type of traffic that goes to those endpoints, right? So it really is a lot to do with the network if you can't patch, right? So it is network controls. Nearly every recommended solution is going to be segmentation, right? And we would recommend looking at things like obviously having firewalls, ACLs within switching environments. There's a lot that you can do about it outside of doing the actual patching. If you can during a shutdown or something like that, absolutely. Even better, modernize the equipment, but it's hard to make a case for that, right? Because it's been working fine. It's not broke, don't fix, right? So yeah, I mean, a lot of that is contingent on network segmentation, and it's really about containing it.
I agree, but network segmentation doesn't solve the problem of malicious.
It mitigates the risk, though. And that's the thing. This is a problem that we're going to have. One of the things I say about vulnerabilities is you give one of our guys a piece of equipment and enough time, he's going to find so many vulnerabilities, right? And do we go and publish that and say, oh my God, look, there's this vulnerability? No, that's not what Dragos does. We do publish vulnerabilities when they're real. We do them if there's a possibility of actual compromise. If it requires physical access, probably you have a bigger problem than just your device, right? So I just like the focus to be on less on vulnerability and more on risk, right? What is actually going to hit you the hardest financially or safety-wise? This is when we get into exercises a lot about what would you consider your crown jewel assets? What do you prioritize? Which sites are making the most money? That's usually the one that's going to take priority over others. What's responsible for the bulk of your production, et cetera, right? And those are the things that you prioritize where you might think about doing things like addressing the vulnerabilities, but those are the ones that you want to segment. And it's really just about mitigating the risk associated with it, rather than having the mentality of the patch solves everything. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I align perfectly with your strategy. My strategy is to stop one location from impacting another location first, so top level segmentation. Once you get that done, get micro segmentation.
Yep.
If I go out and collect all the IoT, the PLCs, all the OT equipment, I find all these vulnerabilities, we're going to go broke patching them.
Yep. Yep.
And then when we do all that, the engineering team's like, I don't even have the time to go do it. And if they do have the time, we don't have the budget to go implement
And
it.
it might break the connection.
So I totally align with segmentation for OT. Stop one location to another location, and then micro segmentation. And so we're even going to a point where this machine can send downtime alarms and counts, get schedules down. This IP talks to these three IPs on these two ports. That's the only thing that goes on. If you want to do remote support, they throw a switch. Now the firewall rules change, and we let VNC, RDP, whatever protocols we in, but the guy at the machine from a safety standpoint knows I let the guys in to do the work.
Right.
They throw the switch, now none of that there, and you contain it even to a machine.
So it's kind of like a lockout tagout just for that machine, except from a network standpoint. Yeah. Yeah.
What are you doing about the engineering workstation talking about PLC that's also from IT purview? It's probably on the IT side.
You gotta fight from, you gotta get those patches servers, you gotta worry about supply chain attacks. There's all kinds of
Where you can patch those, right? Because sometimes a KB will break factory talk or whatever. That happens more often than not, and that's why they have those product compatibility matrices posted as far as what can you actually install and what can't you. Obviously, endpoint protection is huge for that. I'm not saying that no Windows box is safe, right? It's very possible to actually have that EDR solution locally on that desktop as well. Any other questions? Going once? Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
Awesome, thank you.